Welcome to Redbeard Radio. I'm Brian Keith, and we are talking today about professional athletics, about dreams, about failing to meet our dreams, but discovering there's other wonderful things that we weren't even looking at. We're talking today with Alex Feinberg. He's done all kinds of stuff. We're going to hear about being a scholarship athlete, about what he studied in school, about being a pro athlete. It's just going to be a wonderful adventure. Alex, welcome to Redbeard Radio.
Thank you very much, Brian.
Now, you used this crazy phrase as we were doing a little introduction there about being a delusional professional athlete. And when you said that, I thought, wow, I was almost a delusional professional athlete myself. Not exactly, but very close to it. But before I tell that story, which I'm not sure I've ever shared on this podcast, I do want to hear more about your experience of your reality of being a professional athlete. And while now looking back there, you call yourself a delusional one.
Yeah, so, I grew up with well-educated parents, went to a good high school, and was brought up to respect rationality and belief that the more you knew, the better position you'd be in to make good decisions, more successful you'd be. And that hypothesis worked for me through high school. I worked hard, got a scholarship offer to Vanderbilt, had a couple different options that I could have gone to similarly situated schools like a Stanford or a Harvard or something like that. So rationality was something that very much worked well for me until I got to the college level. And then when I got to the college level, one thing that I noticed was that a lot of my teammates who were the best performers didn't think rationally. And, you can kind of excuse that and say, oh, they're lucky. They just happen to be really good at baseball. But no, if you looked at the performance of people who were similarly situated from an athletic standpoint, whether they were similarly fast or had similarly strong arms as pitchers, the ones who were the very best typically were not good students. But one thing that they did have is an irrational belief in their own ability. And this transcended sports. It wasn't just in baseball. It was really with anything that they did. In fact, two of the best mentally situated players that I'd ever played with are named David Price and Ryan Flaherty. David Price has played over 10 years in the major leagues. Ryan Flaherty ended up playing about 8 years in the major leagues. But I noticed before either of them had played a game in the major leagues that no matter what we did, if it was outside of school, they were always the best and the second best out of everybody on the team. And one thing about them is most people who didn't know them very well would say that these people are delusionally self-confident. And so, I started to question, why does this seem to be? Why does this seem to be? And the conclusion that I came to is ultimately that in high pressure situations, the people who are able to interpret reality in a way that's not actually aligned with reality are much better situated to perform in front of 10,000 people when the pressure's on them. So you think about when we're 21, 22 years old, our ability to perform as baseball players is directly linked to our ability to feed ourselves when we get done with school. But if you have all of that pressure on you, good luck throwing the ball accurately across the infield. Good luck taking an aggressive swing at the right pitch. And the people whose mindsets basically amplified their own abilities and depressed their own weaknesses were much better off on the playing field.
Depress their own weaknesses. That sounds really important.
Absolutely.
Usually we think of trying to understand ourselves. Understand yourself. And you're saying, no, don't understand yourself. It's a trap.
I'm saying there are situations where understanding yourself is helpful, and there's situations where understanding yourself is harmful.
There's a book title for you.
Yeah. And so, obviously, if you're a bad baseball player and you're not making the adjustments that would be necessary to improve your game, you're probably not going to get better, right? So that degree of rationality is required. It does help that people have, advisors in their own life who say, dude, you do need to get faster, or you're not going to be able to succeed at this level, or you do need to do X, Y, and Z, or you're not going to succeed at this level. And if they don't heed that advice, then they probably won't succeed at that level. But when the lights go on and the pitcher's throwing to you, the people who are able to blame poor outcomes on things outside of themselves are better able to recover from failure. And baseball is very much a game of failure. You're going to get out 70% of your at-bats if you're doing well. But the reality is, if you don't believe that you're going to get a hit 80% of the time, you will not get a hit 30% of the time because your timing is going to get disrupted. And so the only people who can be successful 30% of the time are delusional enough to think a majority of the times they're up there, they're at an advantage relative to their competition. And this is most exemplified in baseball, but it's also true in other sports. Like, there's no coincidence that both Michael Jordan and Charles Barkley, who are two of the greatest basketball players of all time, had gambling problems. It's because the same mindset that is optimized for performance in elite sports, when transferred into a casino setting, is very harmful, right? So the type of confidence that one would have to walk into a roulette table and say, okay, well, I know that it's going to hit red 3 times in a row, is delusional, because you know what the data is. You have a 12% chance of hitting red 3 times in a row. But the people who can convince themselves that it's true are also the type of people who can convince themselves that they're going to perform in high pressure situations when all reality indicates that maybe they won't. And guess what? Those are the guys who actually end up being the best players.
I did a decade of armored sword fighting, like medieval knight fighting kind of stuff. And I was never a great fighter. Eventually I got to where I was moderately good. And some of the guys I got to fought with were excellent. And one of them was named Michael. And he was just incredible. He was in the moment. He never overthought anything.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas I overthought everything.
Yeah.
So I ended up being a pretty good commander of one side, but I was never a great sword fighter. Michael, though, he was so fast, he moved so cleanly, and to your point, he also was great with the ladies.
Yeah.
Michael had a completely unreasonable belief that every woman wanted to talk to him. And I look at this guy and I think, Michael, how are you getting so much attention from the ladies? Well, he was, just like you're saying, the guy believed. He believed hard. Whereas I was like, well, what's the details? What's the everything? All the everything.
Yeah.
And he just felt it. He felt reality in a way that I didn't feel reality. We're like two halves, the opposite people. And it was incredible to watch him fight because that guy was so fast. And when sword fighting, I've never played baseball significantly, but in sword fighting, we usually one-on-one, and you're moving so fast that if you think at all about what you're doing, you're going to get hit and you're going to lose. And we would fight so fast that sometimes I'd have to ask someone afterwards, what happened? Because I was fighting, but I don't know what happened in that particular challenge. It just happened, and then I know whether I won or lost. I know if I got hit or if I hit them, but I don't know how or when or what.
Yes.
And Michael was so fast, though, because he believed in himself in a way that I didn't.
Yes, and you touch on speed, and speed is actually the biggest reason why delusional self-confidence plays in the baseball field or most hand-eye sports. And it's because the systems of reasoning that we're taught in school are all contingent upon us having at least several minutes to assess a challenge. Because let's face it, most of the challenges that we face in the real world permit us at least a few minutes to make a decision. Maybe perhaps driving is the fastest decision that we make, and most decisions, you at least have a couple seconds. In baseball, the decisions that you make are required to be made in under 1 second. Probably most hand-eye sports require decision-making to be done in under 1 second. Well, guess what? Logical circuitry takes too much time to process information to come out with an accurate decision in 1 second. And the people who are good with logical processing tend to use that in more situations than it's useful. So logical processing makes a lot of sense if you have anywhere from like 5 seconds to 50 days or something to make a decision. Many business decisions will offer you 5 minutes to 50 days to make a decision. But if you have less than that, intuition is actually a much more viable cue to rely on, or means of data assessment to rely on. Now, intuition is looked down upon by the academic community because you can't prove it. You can't prove that it's right. You can't prove that it's wrong. But the reality is that intuition is the only decision-making tool that you can use that can be roughly accurate with under 1 second of reaction time. And when you lack self-confidence, your intuition will be disrupted, and you frankly will not be able to rely upon it to tell you how to react, and then you're not going to be able to perform well.
I'm going to tell a story that I'm either telling wrong or I'm telling right, but I don't know. My mom told me I'm telling the story wrong, but I don't know if I'm now recalling the right version or the wrong version. So there's your warning. In something like second grade, I would do math problems, and I would come up with the answer. And they'd say, well, show us your work. And I'd say, is it right or not? And I'd be right most of the time.
Mm-hmm.
And I went on to go be the math guy on our knowledgeable team. We won the state championship in Washington State at the 4A level, the highest level. And so I'm pretty into math. I only got a 740 in the SAT. One other guy beat me out with a perfect score, but I'm pretty into math. And from a young age, I would feel the answer. And there was this time, and this part of the story is definitely true, where in knowledgeable, it was the state championship, the highest level in Washington State, the biggest schools, and it was 3 teams, and it's 14 to 14 to 14. There's 3 questions left, so it could be anyone could win, and it's the third to last question, and it's a math question, and it's some kind of trigonometry. And in this kind of knowledgeable, it's like Team Jeopardy. There was 15 seconds to answer the question, but then if someone else buzzed in, then you got another 15 seconds if they got it wrong. And my team, eventually we buzz in, and all 4 of us are starting to write because, of course, we're all pretty smart people, all 4 of us on our team. And then as the 15 seconds goes on, one after one, they stop writing. And I'm the last person still trying to scratch out this trigonometry thing in a very limited time frame. And there's like 3 seconds left. My captain Chad says, we needed an answer, Brian. And it's a long division thing, and I have to feel the third decimal point of this trigonometry question. And I felt it, and we were right. Yeah. And then it was 15 to 14 to 14. No one knew the next question. We got the last one. We finished out 16 to 14 to 14. But this idea of math is about feeling, not about knowing, which sounds insane, except that I remember that you had to feel it, man. And that's what they didn't like about me when I was in second grade, at least as far as I recall.
Yes. And that's completely true. It's like if you don't have enough time to reason through it, you have to feel through it. But the school system is not built around feeling. And so the people who have the very best intuition are often not the best students, and the people who are the best students often don't have the best intuition because their mental wiring is optimized for a different game. And I think because I was a good student, but because I've also spent a lot of time around successful athletes and successful businessmen who in fact do have good intuition, as proven by their results over and over again, I realize that these are actually separate games, where a lot of people who haven't had exposure to both sets of success don't understand the difference between the two. They don't even understand that the difference exists. That's one advantage that elite sports gave me.
I had a time when I've been sword fighting for, 8 years, 9 years, somewhere in there. So I was pretty experienced mid-level sword fighter. There were some folks at my level who had been fighting for that long who were way better than me. Hello, Derek. And there were some folks who had been fighting for much longer than me, but about 9 years in a sport where most people are 3 to 5 year experience, like, a lot. Mm-hmm. And my teacher, Avalok, was standing up the Team USA, the Olympic level sword fighting group. And he was getting all these guys, like the U.S. never had a team on the U.S. on the Olympic sword fighting stage. And this is not the Olympics. It's called the Battle of the Nations, but it's the same level. Like the whole world joins together, and the U.S. never even tried, but now we finally are trying. The year is, what is this? I don't even know. A long time ago now, 2013, somewhere in there. And he says to me, if you trained hard enough, maybe you could be good enough to lead one of the junior teams. Because my skill is more in thinking and less in. I'm not a great sword fighter. Like, we have people who are great. I was never great. And I thought to myself, I was in year 1 of Redbeard Consulting, which I'm now in year 10. And I thought, do I know that I'll be able to both get this business to where I want it to go and also be an Olympic level sword fighter? Mm-hmm. And if I don't know that I can do both, which one do I choose? And I chose business. Mm-hmm. Now I know people who have traveled all over the world and are known internationally as pro-level athletes. They have fought all over Europe and around, like incredible athletes. And I look at them and I have this wistfulness of, it's not I chose wrong. I don't feel that. I feel I admire, maybe there's some envy in there of these people who pursued this to the exclusion of all else. They have pursued mastery, and boy, have they found it. You watch them fight and you think, wow, these people are masters, and I never became a master. When you look at yourself and you look at your baseball career, do you feel like you got to mastery, or do you feel like if you pursued it longer, you could have attained some higher level of mastery?
I don't think if I pursued it longer, I would have attained a higher level of mastery. I experience a lot of my learning and transformative growth when I remove myself from environments and then revisit them. And so I do think that if I attempted to play baseball, say 5 or 10 years after I stopped playing, a lot of things that didn't make sense to me while I was playing would have made sense to me 5 to 10 years later. And so in that regard, I could have done better. But if I just kept um, doing what I was doing and reinforcing the habits that I had at the time that were limiting, I don't regret for 1 second what would have happened because I would have eventually gotten released from my team, and then have the opportunity to like play independent league baseball, which is not fun and you make no money.
Hmm.
So I don't regret for 1 second the decision that I made to quit when I did. I had a lot of doors open for me, or at least some viable doors open for me when I was getting done. And so that period of my life was over, and I'm happy right now that I'm exposed to baseball in the sense that I'm still friends with the guys who I was friends with, who are major league players and coaches right now. I still like the game, but I'm only exposed to the game, um, and I'm only exposed to the game when I want to be. So a few weeks out of the year, not every day of the year.
Hmm. Let's fast forward through your life story a bit. You spent a whole bunch of time in the corporate world in Hong Kong and at Google. And then you say that you really changed course towards focusing on fitness and health and strength and all that. I would love to bring back something you said earlier about sometimes logical thinking takes too long to make a good decision. And I am awfully curious about how that relates in your perspective to eating well towards moving well. We've discussed on the podcast a number of times before about this. How do you make good decisions, especially around eating and making the right eating decisions to power yourself as an entrepreneur? This morning, I'm proud to report I had a pound of venison sausage, a couple tomatoes, a little bit of sugar-free ketchup, and some goat cheese. So this morning, I'm a professional, but it's because I have to be, because I'm doing 4 podcast interviews. I'm recording a course with one client. I'm like, I have a whole big day where I'm forced to eat well. There's not an option. But sometimes I don't have days like that, and I don't make the best decisions for myself. So I'm curious, from your point of view, how do we move into that intuitive frame where we're not thinking about it? Because what I just said is a thinking thing, right? You're saying today I have to, therefore I will.
Mm-hmm.
Yesterday I didn't have to, therefore I didn't. That's thinking. How
Yeah.
do you help people get to an intuitive place where they're not trying to think about good decisions? They just happen.
Well, so I think to set the foundation of this, one thing that I notice as an elite athlete is that a lot of decisions that are being made about you are not made quantitatively or analytically; they're made heuristically, which is a faster, albeit sometimes less accurate way of thinking. And so, if coaches and scouts are looking at you play at the amateur level, they're less concerned with your statistical output and more concerned with the feel that they get from watching you. Not only
Hmm.
how fast are you, but how fast do your actions look? How fluid do your movements look? And so once I understood that most of the evaluation decisions that were being made about me were done at the heuristic level, I started realizing the importance of heuristics. And once you realize the importance of heuristics, you realize the importance of aesthetics. And once I understood the importance of aesthetics, which was basically during a financial class that I took at Vanderbilt, where we had a financial advisor come in and he was wearing a suit, he spoke well, and he was in good shape. And I realized that, wow, this confident, good-looking man in a suit could say almost anything. If he believed it, I would believe it. Or if he communicated in the way that he believed it, I would believe it. And I want to have that advantage too when I enter the workforce. And so what that looks like is it means I have to stay in shape. If I want to have every advantage I have in the workforce, because I can't control every minute detail about what happens in my career, at the very least, I can always look good. And if I always look good, then I can always tell a credible story for why I'm a good investment to add to your team as an employee, say. And so I was very diligent in going to the gym every morning, even before I had the results that I had right now. Now, from an intuition standpoint, because of my experience as an elite athlete, I realized I couldn't accurately throw the ball across the infield if I thought my way through it. I had to feel my way through it. I had to put myself in a position where instead of making sure 7 things were happening correctly, I could only make sure maybe 1 or 2 things was going right. And then I had to trust myself. And I had this arrogant belief that if my body is telling me that I need to eat a certain type of food, it probably knows something that I logically don't. So, what would happen if all I did was shift my diet towards a more protein dominant diet, which is kind of going off of information that I heard where it's really hard to overeat protein. It's really hard for protein to get stored as fat. So I thought, okay, well, let me just eat protein dominant food. in the proportions that my body is telling me. When I'm hungry only, and then I'll stop eating when I'm full. And simply following that strategy, protein dominant real food when I'm hungry, stop eating when I'm full, only eating sweets to the extent that I crave them, stop eating them when they stop tasting delicious and I stop craving them. I found that the results that I got from that diet approach were way better than the results that most people get from a calorie counting approach. So for me, as long as I'm sleeping properly, my stress levels are managed, I'm hydrating properly, and I'm training properly, as long as I eat protein dominant real food, meaning a majority of my plate is centered around animal protein, I don't overeat. I eat the right amount of food. And so, what I work with people on is basically saying, how can we get your intuition to a place where it's accurately telling you what to eat? That ends up being a lot more sustainable than saying, oh, well, I need to weigh this, measure that, eat this exactly at this time. Like, nobody wants to do that. People want to rely on their intuition. The problem is our modern environments with, being around blue light 24/7, with commutes to work, with insufficient nutrients in processed food, excessive dependence on carbs in the Western diet. All of these things make it very difficult to eat intuitively. But if you understand the blockers that get in the way of intuitive eating and work proactively to eliminate them, for many people, intuitive eating is not just a more sustainable approach, but it actually provides them with better results.
For someone who likes the phrase intuitive eating and they're thinking this sounds cool, what is one specific action someone can take today to eat a bit more intuitively and a bit less of whatever the opposite is?
Don't eat unless you're very hungry.
Ooh, what does very mean?
Well, you know what it means. You know it. Like if you don't know that you're very hungry, you're not very hungry.
So I have this challenge where my wife says, are you hungry? And I say, no. And she looks at me. And then she says, do you want to eat? And I say, I'd love to eat, because it's rare for me to feel hunger. So when you said very, I'm laughing like, yeah, I know it, really hungry, which is there's a little bit of pain in your stomach and your body's saying, you need to eat something. It's not a mood. It's not a vibe. It's for me, a physical emptiness of pain. And it's actually beyond the emptiness level, right? Like you fast for a day, you get to empty, but maybe it's, the end of your full day of fasting. You're like, I'm actually feeling some discomfort. It's more than just emptiness.
Right. Yeah, that's exactly true. Like,
So for someone who's never done fasting, or they're like, that sounds horrible. Why would I want to be in pain in my body? how do you describe to your clients what very feels like?
well, it's just the amount you can bear. Like, there's gradients of discomfort, and you just want to make sure that you're on the spectrum of discomfort, right? So, if you're not on the spectrum of discomfort, yeah, I could eat, I could not eat, right? You also know if you're having at least mild hunger pains. If you have at least mild hunger pains, then you're hungry, right? It's if it's making you uncomfortable to not eat, you are probably hungry. If you are not physically uncomfortable by not eating, you are probably not hungry, right? Our hunger signals are evolved. Not all animals have them. Dogs, for example, do not have satiety signals the way humans do. Humans, in fact, have satiety signals. They're innate within us. We just need to make sure that we are listening to them, listening to what's naturally buried within us, within all of us, is natural satiety signals, natural hunger signals. We crave foods because we need those foods. Now, that can be distorted, obviously, particularly for people who eat a lot of processed food and a lot of processed sugar. Their cravings are going to be very distorted. But if you eat whole foods and lead a relatively healthy lifestyle and don't have any major metabolic disruption, type 2 diabetes, insulin resistance, all that, for the most part, your hunger signals should be aligned with what you need. And so you just need to be uncomfortably hungry, and then you eat. But there's gradients of discomfort. You don't need to be insanely uncomfortable. It just needs to be mildly uncomfortable.
I love it. Alex, for people who are intrigued by this and wondering what they can do to go get better control of their health and change their relationship with how often they're eating, what they're eating, where's the best place for people to find you?
Just find me on Twitter. My DMs are open. Alex Feinberg 1, Feinberg 1, Alex Feinberg 1. Shoot me a DM. I have a lot of products available. My intuitive eating guide, explains exactly how I go about doing what many people consider to be impossible, what I consider to be very easy. I also have recipes that align very well with my intuitive eating guide, as well as a masterclass that combines fitness, all aspects of fitness, so recipes, eating, and then also intuitive training, because intuitive training is basically how I continue to make gains after 30. When I was in my 20s, I thought the only way to get stronger and faster is by training harder. Once I got to 30, I realized, no, I'm actually not going to be able to just continually outwork myself. I need to listen to my body. And if my body's telling me to rest, I need to rest. I wonder what would happen. Well, what happened was I ended up getting more powerful workouts when I did work out because I was properly recovered for them. Most people either don't work out enough or work out too much. And if you're in either bucket, your results are far from optimized. Once you understand recovery properly, then you can start making percentage gains on a monthly basis, couple 2-3% on a monthly basis. Whereas if you don't understand your recovery cycles, maybe you're making 0.5% gain on a monthly basis. Well, which person is going to be doing better? The guy who's getting 2 or 3% better per month versus the guy who's getting 0.5% better a month 12 months out. It's like the guy who's compounding 2 to 3% per month times 12 months is going to be 30% better by the end of the year, where the guy who isn't is going to be like 7% better by the end of the year. Okay, push that out a few years, the person who understands his recovery cycles is going to be in much better shape than the person who doesn't. And that's something that modern fitness doesn't really factor in very much. You look at a lot of training programs and it's like, do this on this day. It's like, well, how do you know if you're recovered enough to do that? A lot of people aren't. And so for me, that's why I've had much, much better results into my mid-30s training less, trying less hard. It's because I had to be more efficient in how I allocated my effort. And lo and behold, I found a better way to allocate it.
That's beautiful. Folks, to get more Alex Feinberg 1 on Twitter. Alex, thanks for being on the show.
Absolutely. My pleasure.